Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, February 17th, and this is the Senate Agricultural Committee. And this morning, we're going to be talking with our guest in regards to H466, which is an act relating to surface water withdrawals in interbasin transfers. So I'd like to have the committee introduce themselves, and we'll get started with our council member, Michael O'Grady. Chris?
Good morning, everybody. Chris Pearson from Chittenden County.
Hi, Anthony Polina, Washington County.
Ryan Collimore from Rutland County.
And Corey Parent is from Franklin County is our other member, and he had to run to get his daughter a prescription, and we'll be back. I'm Senator Bobby Starr, and I represent Orleans and Essex County along with Richford and Montgomery from Franklin County. As I said, we're going to be taking up and listening to our guests in regards to 466 and H466. And I'd like to introduce our legislative council person, Michael O'Grady. I thought Michael was with us. There he is. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Senator Starr. How are you?
Good. So Michael, I think you've been working on H466 and your other assignments. So could you give us just a quick overview in regards to our major concern is the 5,000 gallon withdrawal portion of that bill, but if you could give us quick overview, it would be appreciated.
Sure. So just for background, the H466, it originated with a report. Well, actually, let's step back. A few years ago, there was a proposal for water from one watershed in the state to be transferred to another watershed in the state for the purposes of snowmaking for a ski resort. And that raised questions as to what standards, laws, permits, etc., would apply for that transfer. And it was determined that there really wasn't much on the books for that type of transfer or for any general surface water withdrawal, surface water diversion. Instead, ANR regulates currently that type of activity. If it's for snowmaking, there is a program for snowmaking. If it's not for snowmaking, they operate under a procedure which sets a minimum low flow for the water and basically restricts activities that would go below that low flow. But then there's also the opportunity, if under that procedure, if you're withdrawing at a rate that's below the specified rate, that you can continue to operate. You should probably have ANR talk to you about how they currently conduct regulation of non-snowmaking diversions. But anyway, because of that discussion, there was an act number 173 of 2020 that created a working group to study the issue of whether or not to establish a regulatory program in the state for surface water diversions and interbasin transfers of surface water. The membership of that committee included the Secretary of ANR, the Secretary of Agriculture, one member of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources, one member of the House Committee on Natural Resources, 2 persons from businesses relying on large quantities of surface water, 2 persons representing nonprofit environmental groups, 1 hydrologist, 1 person representing an agriculture or forest business. And so those were the members of the group. They issued their report on December 15th, 2021, and there was a bill that was drafted this year to implement their recommendations. If you read their report, you will see that they contemplated how much gallonage is used for vegetable and fruit farms on average per day. They looked at other state programs, and they specifically referenced Minnesota at a 10,000 gallon per day standard. And then they noted that they were including the 5,000 gallon standard in order to collect information about the use of surface waters and surface water withdrawals and diversions in the state. And that effectively highlights how this program is set up. It does not immediately set up a permit program with a gallonage threshold for a permit. What H466 does is it first requires withdrawals of more than 5,000 gallons per day to register. And then if once registered and withdrawing over 5,000, then they have to start reporting about their withdrawals. And then in January 1, 2025, July 1, 2026, ANR is supposed to develop a surface water permit program, but that permit program currently does not have a gallonage threshold. ANR is going to propose that threshold in the rule. So I can go through the bill a little bit more in detail if you would like.
Well, we've got to be done by 10:15 or so, and I didn't know how much time you have either, Michael. We have three witnesses, and we got to keep at least 15 minutes each for them. But I think we could can you do that in 5 or 10 minutes?
Sure, I'll be quick and I'll just focus on the major aspects of the bill.
Yep.
Okay, so let
Sure.
me share my screen. So this, I'm working off of your committee's website and the as passed by House version of 466 that's on the website. First thing that this is being added to an existing chapter of law on regulation of stream flow, but that existing chapter is really about stream alteration, taking material out of a stream, not taking the water out of the stream. So the first major definition that you'll want to look at is frequency, how often water will be withdrawn from a surface water, because that's going to be part of the registration and potentially the permit program. Interbasin transfer, it's the conveyance of surface water from a basin to another basin. Rate of withdrawal, which is the issue that you're looking at, the 5,000 gallons, the volume of surface water that is withdrawn over a period of time that's reported in gallons per minute. And then surface water, it's pretty much all river, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, etc. in the state. There are exceptions. The first is groundwater. The second is artificial water bodies under the water quality standards. And those include off-stream reservoirs and wastewater treatment systems permitted under 6 VSA 215. Those are agricultural wastewater treatment systems. So your manure pond is not a water of the state, thank God. And then treatment ponds, lagoons, wetlands, etc., and then constructed wetlands or other impoundments used for irrigation or watering of livestock. Those are all not going to be subject to this program. And then you get to withdraw. It's the intentional diversion from a surface water by pumping, gravity, or other method. The purpose of being used for irrigation. So irrigation is contemplated. Industrial use, snowmaking, livestock watering is also contemplated. Water supply, aquaculture, or other offstream uses. Then you get to the policy section. I'll just skip over that. The policy is to assure the quality of water and to make sure that the industrial and other business sectors continue to have a viable use of the water. So then there's the registration. Beginning on January 1, 2023, any person withdrawing 5,000 gallons or more of surface water within a 24-hour period shall register with the secretary. They register location, frequency and rate, description of the use, the capacity of the system, and a schedule for the withdrawal. And then beginning on January 1, 2023, they report. Reports are filed annually by January 15th. It includes similar information, amount of water withdrawn each month, location, daily maximum withdrawal for each month, daily rate, date of daily maximum withdrawal, and any other information required by the secretary. Now, the bill contemplates that low rates of withdrawal will potentially not have a meter. So it allows withdrawals between 5,000 and 50,000 gallons of surface water to estimate the total volume or to provide meter data. Anything over 50,000 gallons in a 24-hour period has to use a meter. There are exceptions, public emergency, snowmaking, because it's already required to report, public water supply, and any other similar program that ANR already collects this information for. And then on or before July 1, 2026, ANR implements a surface water withdrawal permit program. They're going to do that through rule, where they're going to require a permit or other authorization based on potential impacts of surface water. You will see no rate threshold that triggers this permit. That is going to be developed during the rulemaking process. So it could be 5,000, it could be 50, it could be 100. So, and then there's things that they have to address in that rulemaking and application that they have to set, including a lot of the information that you just saw in the registration and the report. They may issue a general permit, and then there are exceptions. The exception for the permit would be for fire suppression or other public emergency. But I read their rulemaking to potentially give them ability to set more exceptions in rule. For existing surface water withdrawals, they're going to give non-snowmaking withdrawals until July 1, 2030 to come into compliance if they're registered and they're not going to expand their withdrawal. And then for snowmaking, existing withdrawals under snowmaking that were approved under the snowmaking rule shall not require additional technical review. ANR might issue them a permit, but doesn't have to. For new snowmaking withdrawals, they're still going to be reviewed under the snowmaking rule, but ANR is going to issue them a surface water withdrawal permit. Then ANR has its enforcement authority. Then there's a section on interbasin transfers of water, which I won't go through since that's not necessarily your concern. There's the rulemaking authority for ANR. Most of the specifics are in the permit program section. This is section 2 is ANR's enforcement authority. Section 4 is ANR's the authority of anyone to appeal the decision of the Secretary of ANR. The act takes effect on July 1, 2022, but the operative dates for registration, reporting, and the permit program are all built into the bill. So that's the bill.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm wondering, before we get started, did you work with the committee way back when a committee was formed and made up of the Secretary of A&R and Secretary of Ag and the members? Did you work on that committee?
Yes, I drafted that bill too.
Yeah.
And the membership of it, it does include representatives of agriculture and farming, as did the study group. Ryan Patch was I believe the agency's representative. And I do know they had discussions about irrigation. I was not participating in the study group. I only went to one study group meeting, and the legislation is largely based on what the study group recommended.
From what you just told me, it sounds like snowmaking gets more preference than food gets, and I don't know how you go skiing without much food.
Well, snowmaking already has an approval process. Snowmaking is the one current diversion that already goes through a regulatory process. And it's a process that was hard fought, but currently works. And so the concept is not to change the snowmaking process because it works.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're getting preferential treatment. It's just that they're already regulated.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Chris?
Thank you. Just a couple questions, Michael. So is this actually sort of pulling more users into something similar to what snowmaking goes through, in a sense?
It is pulling surface water withdrawals, diversions into a regulatory program that they don't necessarily need to go through right now.
And you may remember, Michael, years ago you tried to help me. I think I've long been annoyed that there's a guy down in Pittsfield somewhere in that area who extracts our water, puts it in bottles, or puts it in tankers and takes it to Massachusetts to bottle. And I thought we should give him a little price per gallon or something, but never quite managed to do that. But I think that is groundwater, right? That's not being impacted here. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a spring, and that is not impacted here because bottled water facilities are technically public water systems, which are accepted from this program. The groundwater withdrawal program, that requires registration at 20,000 gallons on average per day, and it requires a permit at 57,600 gallons per day.
So this is much less. So my last question is, a farmer who was, we've seen some emails, as I gather, they wouldn't be consistent daily. It would be, when I'm irrigating, maybe when I'm using water for cleaning and stuff. So is your understanding that would be sort of one application that would deal with the year, or is it like, hey, I mean to irrigate next week, here's my application? I'm not clear on the structure.
So right, so that's a valid question. A way that other states deal with that is it's an average per day over a 30-day period. So if you are going to average that amount of withdrawal per day over a 30-day period, at any 30-day period within a calendar year, then you have to report.
And are you? But you're reporting after the fact, or you're asking permission
Sure.
ahead of time?
Well, it's states do it differently. Some require you to register, and you're with any withdrawal, right? Or any withdrawal above a certain threshold. And then for a permit, in order to continue that withdrawal over a certain threshold, you need to get the permit. So this isn't that different from some states. You know, New York agriculture has to register, but if they're over 100,000 gallons, but they don't need a permit, where everybody else over 100,000 gallons needs a permit. You know, and so there's different schemes. Minnesota, I think, is 10,000, and
So-
others are, you know, it's different schemes.
Well, let me ask it this way. It seems to me a big difference between a farmer who is diverting water this way, getting, you know, sending one notice in per season or something, versus every month, or having to figure out what the month ahead is going to look like. So are you saying that that's up to the rule making, or is it firmed up here?
So remember, there's a registration. If you have that amount, they probably could be clarified at any one point during a year. You've withdrawn that amount during a day, you have to register. And then you have to report, and the report is an annual report. So you're reporting on your usage over the previous year. And then in 2026, hopefully the rule will be adopted. There will be standards for who and when you have to apply for the permit for that certain threshold gallonage rate of withdrawal.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we'd better get our witnesses and give them time, and should get started with them. And on my schedule, I have Bill, or as I know, but William
Bill's fine.
Scott, who's a former vocational agricultural teacher, and now a vegetable grower. Virgin's Middlebury area, Bill? Addison County.
Addison up in Orleans.
Yeah. So welcome, Bill, and Bill and I served on the FFA state crew too many years ago, right, Bill?
Yes, man. Yes, sir.
So good morning and welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much for listening to us this morning. I was trying to get out of of what Mike said about the bill, because he's helped to get it crafted and so forth, about the purpose of it and why it's actually rose to the surface so that we have something to do with it. And I guess I can understand that, except that it bothers me a little that dairy farmers that are maybe using out of a pond, for instance, a cow consumes about 40 gallons a day, and they're using, if you have 150 cows, you're going to certainly be over that 5,000 gallon limit per day, every day, where some of us are not using an irrigation system only when it's needed. And it seems maybe more in the last few years than we've used it in the way past, because we've had such irregular periods of drought and periods of too much water. The other thing that bothers me, and I guess this gets into the rules later, is that that limitation is limiting for me just on a 4 to 5 acre operation. I can use that 5,000 gallons in a day on occasions with overhead irrigation. Many of us are going to drip, which uses a lot less water. But I'm pumping out of a pond that I built, tile drained into the pond, so I get a return of the water that's necessary through that tile drainage back into the pond. So I'm taking from the surface water, but I'm not really going to hurt the surface water of what's going into the Lewis Creek. During a drought, it's not going to matter anyway, because both of us are going to be really hurting for water. The other is the expense if you have to go to metering. Uh, Can't fathom exactly on an irrigation system with a 6-inch outlet, how you're gonna have a meter that's gonna tell you what amount you're putting out. I know how much the nozzles put out, and I know how long I run it and what the pressure is, so I can assume what the volume is, but to come down to the nearest 5,000 gallons, I think that's gonna be a pretty difficult task, even with drip irrigation too. So I kind of understand what they're doing with this. I don't know if a surface pond like mine is one that will be regulated. Occasionally, I have to go to Lewis Creek if my ponds go dry. And I know basically how much they hold when I pump. But I haven't had to do that in years. It's come pretty close the last couple of years. So I think many of us are concerned about the extra layer of paperwork that we really don't need. Most of us are small growers in the state. And the undue burden that's going to take to accomplish all the measures that the state wants. So that's basically where I stand with it.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Committee, do you have it? We could run through our witnesses and then open it up to a round table type discussion with questions. So we'll go to Joseph Dutton. Morning,
Yeah.
Joe.
Good morning, everybody. So first off, thanks for affording me the opportunity to testify. A little background on me. For the last 40 years, my family's been farming along the West River in Windham County. Between the towns of Brookline and Newfane, we have approximately 85 acres of irrigatable land. Our soil could easily be described as a sandy loam. We grow a variety of crops, strawberries being one of the most important. It's certainly not an overstatement to say without access to the West River, we wouldn't be in business. The health of the watershed is of the utmost concern to any farmer. It truly is our livelihood, and we pay close attention to the environment. And every day, to the best of our abilities, we really try to be proper stewards of the land and the water. So first, I'd like to say that this is clearly a nuanced situation, and I agree with the points that Bill brought up, and I do agree with the position that I've seen from the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. So I'll just try to quickly summarize my feelings on this. One thing I'd also like to submit that maybe some of you have seen, but I'll send it over, is a memorandum from the Vermont Department of Agriculture. It seems like it was probably compiled during that study that Michael was talking about. It's just a one-page summary of that study of agricultural irrigation in Vermont. And I think it does an excellent job of representing the negligible impact that farmers around the state have on the surface water. I know this bill doesn't necessarily pertain only to agriculture, but this report, it really shows the contrast between farmers and, for instance, the ski industry. One of the big things it brought up is that the entirety of agricultural irrigation in Vermont is really only equivalent to one of the average to large ski mountains in their use on the surface water. So speaking of the burden on farmers, it's easy to say that this whole system is only going to be just one or two more forms that we're going to have to fill out, but that's what it is. It's one or two more forms. And the times in the year that farmers are using this water is oftentimes the busiest time of the year. So a farm like mine is similar to most of the farms in the state. We're a family-run business. And like many of the other farms, we've been suffering from a labor shortage that we were dealing with long before the COVID crisis made things even worse. And the idea of installing meters and filling out forms, but ultimately having to deal with a permitting system, it's really something that we don't have time for, especially when it doesn't seem to me to provide any clear benefit to the state. It really comes down to, if this was shown to be absolutely necessary, then I'm sure farmers would be happy to shoulder the burden and move forward. But it looks like it's a cumbersome process that doesn't really have any need to exist. So to expand on that sentiment, I would ask, what really is the data that's been drawn upon to show that we need to move forward with permitting withdrawals between 5,000 to 50,000, or even well above 50,000. We all know that we're living in a changing climate, and lack of access to water is certainly a looming problem for the future of our country, but it doesn't seem to be in Vermont. So historically, Vermont is between 15th and 25th of the states in terms of rainfall. And we can take that along with the results of a 2015 study of water usage by the United States Geologic Survey. Vermont was number 50 in terms of water usage. So no one can say for certain what the climate's going to be in the future, but it does seem that we're going to remain at the bottom of the water usage. And it also seems that our problem with surface water is probably going to continue to be that we oftentimes have too much of it rather than the inverse. So I would ask again, what's the perceived benefit of moving forward to permit the usage of this water? So really, to sum everything up, I would hope that the Senate would choose not to pass this bill as it's proposed. The main thing being linking together the first stage of data collection with already putting in to the legislation mandating for permitting. It doesn't seem that we have the data to point to any need for this. It really feels like it's going to be an undue burden on the agricultural community in this state. I would say that if the Senate and the House really feel as though they need to continue to look into this issue, that maybe we could move forward collecting more data without trying to institute permitting. And I know that that's something farmers would probably be happy to provide that data. Maybe this is something that UVM or the extension program could help with. And after collecting more data, if there's really a compelling scientific analysis of the data that shows that we really do need to move forward with permitting, then we could have that conversation then. But at this point, it really feels like it's an unwarranted step, and it's just adding another layer of red tape.
Well, thank you, Joe. We'll move right on to Justin.
Everybody, thank you. I wrote something down because I can go off for a long time in general, so I'm going to stay within the bounds here with a prepared statement. Thank you for allowing me to speak in front of this committee this morning. My name is Justin Rich, and I own and operate Burnt Rock Farm in Huntington. We crop about 25 acres of vegetables every year and manage about 100 acres of land. I'm also the current vice president of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. We have concerns with H466 that relate to the intended outcomes of the bill, as well as the scale of the reporting requirements as it is currently written. We have two main concerns about the bill. One is the 5,000 gallon per day trigger for reporting, and the other is a blanket approach that does not take into account the particular hydrology of the watershed in which the withdrawal is taking place. I want to say on behalf of the board of the VVBGA that Vermont horticultural growers want to protect the health of our state's surface waters while ensuring farms' ability to irrigate without onerous reporting requirements. We live in a very wet climate. Both of these objectives can be met. Vermont's waterways are not uniform, and there is much to understand about our surface hydrology. and differences between different water bodies need to be clarified before setting policy for permitting of water withdrawals. That is to separate out small withdrawals in larger rivers from large withdrawals in smaller rivers. Certain large surface waters cannot reasonably be impaired by agricultural water withdrawals. Other smaller waterways very well could be impaired, and those need to be identified. After determining the hydrology of different surface waters, data on withdrawals should be gathered to help with this decision-making process, but it should be targeted to at-risk waterways and not all of our waterways. If at-risk waterways are determined, farmers in those watersheds should be given financial assistance and technical assistance to construct water storage systems such as ponds, which can be recharged during periods of high rainfall and used for irrigation during drier periods. Vermont's abundant water resources are a major source of competitive advantage for farmers and are used at a very low levels when compared to farmers in more arid parts of the country. We use far less irrigation water and have access to far more than growers in other states. Additionally, most irrigation in Vermont is extremely intermittent. For larger surface waters such as the Winooski, the volume of water flowing through Montpelier at relatively low July levels averages 324 cubic feet per second. That's 2,446 gallons per second, or 209 million gallons in a 24-hour period. 5,000 gallons per day might sound like a lot of water to people, but this just puts in context how much water flows through our state. Those numbers are triple as you get closer to Burlington, by the way. Irrigation can use significant amounts of water, but it is a highly intermittent use. To put in perspective how low 5,000 gallons per acre is for a production farm, most crops require 1 inch of rain per week during the growing season, which equals 27,000 gallons of water per acre. That typically falls from the sky in ample or too ample quantities. Summer is the wettest season in Vermont, so crop needs line up very well with average precipitation levels as a whole. Irrigation helps to bridge the gaps in our usually predictable rainfall. It is not our primary way of getting water to crops. A lawn sprinkler running for 24 hours will approach 4,000 gallons of water. Many horticultural farms employ drip irrigation, which is the most efficient method of irrigation. Irrigating 1 single acre of cropland with drip irrigation for 1.5 hours will exceed 5,000 gallons of water. This is a small amount of land being watered for a very short amount of time. Data gathering at the 5,000 gallon per day level will not materially help with the process because it's capturing a very large number of very low level withdrawal events happening in hundreds of different watersheds of varying degrees of water abundance. Rivers and streams in Vermont are classified as gaining streams, which means that they flow, which means that as they flow, they increase the volume of water they carry, unlike rivers such as the Colorado. This is in contrast to many rivers in the West, which lose water to evaporation as they flow more through more and more arid lowland environments. In other northeastern states, reporting requirements are usually required at 50,000 to 100,000 gallons per day withdrawal levels. If reporting requirements are to be implemented in Vermont, this seems a more reasonable level to begin with, as it will eliminate an onerous regulatory burden on small farmers who are withdrawing very small amounts of water for very short periods of time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Justin. What was the number that you suggested that we could use? You just went through that. You're muted, Justin.
Sorry about that. 50,000 gallons per day to 100,000 gallons per day are our neighboring states reporting trigger numbers.
Yeah, thanks. So the first question, I guess I'll ask, of the three of you, how many of you testified before the committee, the original committee, and then how many of you were invited to natural resources in the House, and how many of you were invited to the natural resources in our Senate committee?
None. I haven't.
As far as I can't speak for all 460 members of the VVBGA, but no one I know of knew that this was happening in December. We did not receive any. We did not receive any invitations to testify in front of the House in December.
And what about you, Joe?
Yeah, so I haven't been involved in any testimony regarding this issue at all in the past. And That's certainly one of our concerns is this bill passing the House, and it seems like the House Ag Committee really had no concerns about the impact that this would have on the agricultural community.
Specifically the horticultural community.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there was a carve out for livestock watering.
Yeah, that's there's a big distinction there, obviously.
But it should not be ignored that dairy farms typically do not irrigate in Vermont. So the dairy community is not as concerned with this for irrigation because it's not a common practice.
But if you had a dairy farm with your vegetable farm, it would be fine to let the cows drink out of the pond and not use their 40 gallons a day or whatever. But it wouldn't be okay for the same owner of the same pond to pump out more than 5,000 gallons in a day to water their vegetables. That's the way I understood the testimony. So anyways, let's move on with some questions from committee members. Chris and then Brian.
Go ahead, Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. So I'm curious, who came up with and on what basis did they come up with 5,000 gallons? Is it just an arbitrary number or is there some sort of data? Maybe I'm asking the wrong people. Maybe Michael has an idea.
Michael quoted some of the information that came out of the other committee.
Yeah.
It was formed to do this. And he said that 10,000 gallons, most states had. But I don't know because we're a small state, maybe they wanted to cut the gallonage in half.
Let me just clarify. I just said that the threshold around the country, and it's normally east of the Mississippi in the Eastern Water Doctrine states. It can vary. I believe as Justin referenced, it's 100,000 in New York, it's 50,000 in other neighboring states, it's 10,000 in Minnesota. The threshold for registration and reporting can change from state to state. The report that the study committee submitted does have a justification. It does say that one of the reason that they're choosing 5,000 gallons is to collect as much information as they can regarding the use of surface waters in the state for the purpose of developing a regulatory program. That's effectively what they're looking for with the 5,000 gallons. And the recommendation from the study group is that all users that withdraw 5,000 gallons or more of water in a 24-hour period register and report their water use to the Agency of Natural Resources. The study group selected the threshold of 5,000 gallons of water to capture a wide array of potential water withdrawals while still excluding residents that may withdraw water intermittently to water their gardens or for other domestic uses. Additionally, the threshold was selected based on the fact that most of Vermont's rivers and streams are relatively small and can be negatively affected by excessive water withdrawal. That was the basis.
Well, that last statement is really history. I mean, any fifth grader would know if you draw too much water out of a small brook, you're gonna do damage to, to the brook and everything else. But so it was basically set at 5,000 gallons so that it would take in as many people as possible to be able to collect more data on what the usage actually is.
That's correct.
Yeah, Joe?
As was indicated, a water sprinkler uses more than that on a daily basis if it's used. And a lot of that water is coming from Lake Champlain or a big lake or a reservoir that maintains a lot more water than we do.
Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah,
Plus, you gotta remember too, that the water that we're using, if we're using it in excess, goes down to the water table, helps to build the water table, and ultimately does end up as groundwater, which is important to even wells in an area. So it's not a waste of water, and it's also contributing to the environmental factors that go along with that.
Yep. Joe?
Yeah, Senator Starr, I think you kind of touched on one of the big things in this bill is that when you say, and I believe this is correct, that they went with a 5,000 gallon minimum for reporting to try to collect as much data as they can. It seems like that having a data collection be directly coupled with in a legislation with the regulatory process, it really seems like we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. Like, why don't we collect the data prior to mandating some form of regulation?
Yeah. Well, you don't want to forget, us folks in Montpelier sometimes do a lot of backing up, so the cart is before the horse. Brian, did you have any other questions? Chris?
Thank you. Just first a clarification, Mr. Scott, you mentioned your irrigation pond, I guess. Michael, is that looped in here as it's currently drafted?
No, under the definition of surface water, constructed ponds that are used for irrigation are not surface waters and would not be part of reporting, registering, or permitting.
Okay, so
Not that clear in the readings. Every time you read another statement, it sounds like that pond that's there is subject. The state figures that my surface water is theirs.
So is your constructed pond greater than 10 acres?
Goodness no.
Does it have a connection to another water of the state?
If there's any overflow, it goes into Lewis Creek, yeah.
Okay, so that they're probably saying that there's a connection to a navigable water, and because there's a connection, that brings it under their jurisdiction.
So most ponds would be connected to some source if they overflow.
Well, the farm ponds generally are accepted from the definition of surface water unless the Agency of Natural Resources shows there's some connection. A lot of farm ponds that I know are not surface water because there's just no connection. So if there's no connection and it's less than 10 acres, you will not be part of this program.
So, but I would be because I'm connected to a
Right.
drainage system that does end up in Lewis Creek. All ponds have to drain somewhere, they're part of the watershed drainage.
But do you have a pipe or a ditch that goes directly to the stream, Bill?
Not directly because it has to cross other property boundaries to get there.
But it's just running on top of the ground, right?
Right, well, there are ditches to ditch the fields that ultimately take that overflow water.
Yeah. So the language in the bill says a constructed pond, provided that it's not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. And that means there's a connection. And so if A&R's already asserted jurisdiction over that pond, they've already determined that there's some sort of connection.
So that's what causes me to be excited about the way this bill reads.
Yeah. I can see why you would look at this and say you're not sure if you're covered or not, because it's not intuitive to the normal reader to read into that that there has to be a connection for it to be under the program.
I guess I submit to you again that any pond has an overflow pipe. Otherwise, it may burst its banks or water finds a way over, and that water ends up in the estuary or the basin of whatever watershed you're in. Eventually a river and a stream.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, that's go ahead.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming in. You've certainly opened my eyes to some of the tricky dynamics here, and I appreciate what Mr. Rich said is this attempt to blanketly approach every waterway in the state is, and I think Mr. Dutton said the same, that's tricky. Just so I understand, I mean, and you know, I would guess this committee will try to influence this bill, but it's not going to ultimately be up to us. We're threading some needles here. So help me understand, and maybe particularly for you, Bill, in the Kingdom. I remember last summer, I feel like it was last summer, we got a lot of rain and people were really relieved because there'd been quite a dry spell. And somebody told me, well, you know, this isn't enough to finish the drought. You'll see it'll help crops because they'll absorb it quickly, but really our groundwater is down. And so you know, we are getting a lot of rain events. They're increasingly short and intense. But just I mean, am I totally wrong? Have we had long periods of drought in different regions of the state? And it can be very different, I think, to Mr.
Yeah,
Rich's point.
it can vary from town to town, actually. I
Yeah.
think the northern part of the state last summer got a lot more rain than we did. The subsequent rain that we didn't get early when you want to grow crops can be a disaster. But when the rain did come, it sure certainly built the water table back up, but it was into the late fall before that amounted to anything. I mean, my pond was almost empty by the end of July.
Yeah.
But the crazy part of this whole deal is any water you used went back into the ground and helped the water table. It isn't like you were taking it away from the water table and wasting it or causing it damage. I mean, but anyways, Justin, you kind of had your hand up.
Thank you. I was just going to respond to do we ever experience drought? I've been on my property for 13 years, and the driest month we've ever had is 1.8 inches of rain, which in other parts of the country would be a comical thing to call a drought. So my specific location we're, I think, 3 inches of rainfall short of being classified as a temperate rainforest.
Yeah.
So it's
So
much
it's really
of this is
different.
a nationalization of issues, perhaps. I mean, water is a massive issue in other parts of the country, and that cannot be denied. And in certain places here, it could be too. You know, like I said, if I tried to overhead irrigate, which is very inefficient, if I tried to overhead irrigate 40 acres of potatoes, I could probably use up more than half the flow of the Huntington River at once. I think we should avoid that. You know, we're very much on board to have restrictions where they are causing actual potential environmental harm.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating the difference regionally, and you know, I folks mentioned sprinklers, and I flood a little skating rink in my backyard for my elementary school kids. But I will just say I pay for that water. I like to say I borrow it from Lake Champlain. I live in Burlington, but I pay for it. I get an envelope every winter that says something must be wrong because your water, you check your toilets, right? Because for one day I run the hose for 4, 5, 6 hours, but I'm borrowing that water, but I am paying for it. And in doing that, I'm paying for some infrastructure that deals with stormwater, obviously, in addition to it. So it's tricky. Anyway, I really appreciate that. I guess one last question for all of you. is there, I'm hearing that, the limits are poor and it's a paperwork pain and the expense of metering. Would it, I guess nobody's going to want this, but would there be a compromise to just simply alerting the state in some way, hey, for this farm, we sometimes extract surface waters? Is that, is it appropriate? I can see folks wanting to understand the universe as opposed to trying to limit the universe or really burden particular uses. Is that a compromise that might be a starting place?
Above what gallonage though, Chris?
Well,
10,000
that's a fair
gallons?
question. I'm not sure I've got a solution, but right now, I guess, is there any connection to sort of understanding the universe of who might be extracting surface waters? Does that seem too burdensome, or is there, would that be a slippery slope, or what's your attitude about something like that?
I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't a survey of the producers like us in the state to begin with, who could give you an idea of how many gallons we might use in a season before they even put this together. 5,000 gallons is ludicrous. Even for a 1 acre operation, they could certainly use all that gallonage in one instance. So, and also the paperwork that goes along with it. If you're asked to do something, to come up with an idea of what you need to do from a regulatory standpoint, and what do you want to regulate? We're producing food for the state, just like the dairy farmers are producing milk. And the need for the paperwork, the expense to do this for what it actually costs or ensues the environment certainly is negligible.
Yeah, my question comes from,
Chris, your question is maybe 2 years late. We should have had somebody on that committee.
Well, they did have some agriculturalists on the committee, but I don't know who they were, but they may have been all dairy farmers. I don't know.
I've been on the vegetable and berry board for years, and we were never requested to serve on anything like this. So I would say the needs of vegetable and berry and fruit growers in general have been not included at all in this.
Did you say, Justin, you had 400 and some odd members?
I think we're at 461 members in 2021. The current numbers are still getting updated.
So, there's a perfect crew there that could funnel information into the whoever, ag agency or A&R, that could give them good numbers, I would think, because you're spread all over the state, I would presume.
Yes, and I was on the original committee that started that organization, and that was years ago. So it's been around a long, long time, and you spoke of Vern by name, so you know who he is.
Oh, Vern, and then we got the guy over in Hardwick that grows all kinds of veggies. The farmer over there that lost his barn to fire or something.
Yeah.
Can't think of his name, but
Pete Johnson.
well,
Hey,
the whole process. Is somebody speaking?
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I would just say
Joe.
that to Senator Pearson's question, I do think that if you wanted to collect data from farmers, depending on how you went about it, I think that there's a lot of farmers that would be happy to report even the very small amounts. We would, even the 5,000 gallon amounts, if it was just in an effort to gather a better understanding of the situation in Vermont, I think farmers would be happy to do that. That understanding our state and the environment and the watersheds that we impact really is of great importance to us. I just see the problem. I don't see how you do that with this bill, because the data collection it seems concretely tied to the regulatory aspect of the bill. So that's where I think people have a problem with it, is that we're being mandated to send in the data, and then regardless of what that data shows, there will be regulatory action taken.
Well, let me just try to make it clear where I'm coming from. I had nothing to do with this bill. You know, the House suddenly sent it. We're seeing this probably about the same time you are. But the five of us, as sympathetic as we are, and my committee here will tell you that they're sometimes get tired of me banging the drum on the need for diversified ag, which you all satisfy, and I think, frankly, more state sympathy and support needs to go your direction. But we're not in charge, and we're 5 votes out of 30 in the Senate, so we'll have to meet some others somewhere in between. And you know, this bill as it's currently drafted, I totally agree with you, Justin, Joseph, is you know, not contemplating what I'm saying, but I'm trying to jump ahead to, you know, well, what could we say to counterparts that may not be as interested in this discussion as we are? And that's where I'm looking for some way to say, look, you know, farmers are not totally oblivious. This is a big issue, and particularly elsewhere. So anyway, I'm trying to jump ahead to how do we get someplace that doesn't feel too unreasonable for you all, but also lets us say to people who are less supportive that, you know, they get at least some knowledge. I mean, I'll just say I agree with the sentiment that to sort of, especially if you're just looking at this bill, to think of the ski areas as getting, we're not worried about you, let's go harass the little berry growers. I mean, that's really offensive. Now, the truth is we've been dealing with the ski areas for decades, and it's actually more bringing it in line, but there has to be just a scale of the businesses, I think, and the value of the product in terms of our approach, in my opinion.
Well, see, I
Justin?
definitely agree with everything you said there, and we kind of are going to have to compromise. And is there any possibility with this bill moving forward of decoupling the data collection with some form of regulatory action? And that's where I think farmers would be far more amenable to providing data if it wasn't inevitably tied to regulation, regardless of what the data shows.
I think, yeah, the first thing this is an H bill, so most committees aren't working on H bills yet because we have crossover in a couple of weeks, and so they're working on, like we're working on Senate bills, trying to get them to the House. So if you do have a House bill, you kind of sit on that until after crossover because you have until the end of the session. So I would think that you three and Vern and others, the whole association should write our Natural Resources Committee, Chris Bray is the chair, and request that you be heard, because I don't even know if the Senate is, you know, our Natural Resources Committee has worked on this bill at this point. And you should request time before that committee. I mean, the story that you told us this morning in there would certainly, I think, help, and we can talk with them and you know, give them our point of view, and we could even threaten to ask the bill be sent to ag if need be, for us to work on it. But we try to work closely together with other committees so we don't have a big argument on the Senate floor. But you should request time before the Senate Natural Resources Committee.
I have done that, Bob.
Go ahead, Bill.
I've done that, but I haven't heard back from Chris Bray.
When did you send your request, Bill?
Oh golly, last week.
We'll send him another one.
I will.
Yeah, that, just so folks know, the typical, it's quite normal that they wouldn't look at an H bill in a Senate committee. You don't need to know this other than just for this context until probably like April. So if we don't send over Senate bills before mid-March, they're dead. So that's typically the workflow.
Yeah. And, but get some of your fellow growers, the association with 400 and some odd members. I mean, that should help the cause if they'd come in and support your changes. And the other thing I would do is the association, I'd send a note over to the Agency of Ag and ask them, why weren't you involved or at least informed that this committee was working last year and they never even invited you in to hear from you.
Well, Ryan
almost
Patch was,
embarrassing.
didn't we hear Ryan Patch was part of the group?
Yeah, but you never called these guys. I don't know where he was, but
He just
that-
alerted the Veg and Berry Growers Association last week that this bill had
last
passed.
week, I'll be
Yeah.
darned. Really.
And he was
really
concerned with the
unfair.
language in it, but I guess he didn't have the ability to change anything.
But anyways, any other questions from committee members?
Thank you, Bob, for listening to us
Well,
Thank you.
Kind of too bad.
and responding so quickly.
Well, it's kind of too bad. I didn't care about talking with you guys. It was forced upon us.
It was.
No, it's always a pleasure to, to see folks that are in, like Chris said, he's always harping on, well, you gotta get those berries and veggie people going and well, here we are trying to help, and then we run into this wall, where you're right up against it. So hopefully, together we'll try to get this worked out to everybody's satisfaction. A&R, their plate is pretty full. I don't know where they're gonna come up with more people to look after this issue, but I know there was something that came up earlier this week or last week where they didn't even have anybody to do the regulating on certain things. And so, but get hold of Bray and try to get some time. And if you really have trouble getting in there, let us know. Just send Linda a note and she'll get it to us, and we'll talk with Senator Bray and try to convince him to spend some time on this. It'll probably be after crossover though.
Yeah, that's interesting because we weren't able to find out when they were going to be talking about it. Somebody said maybe this coming week, but we haven't heard anything back. So I've got Jackie Folsom kind of with her ear to the ground, even though Farm Bureau doesn't have any things on this particular type of activity with water, but they will have next year.
Golly, Joe, the president of Farm Bureau, is a big veggie grower.
Yeah, he's been on the email list promoting looking at this too.
Yeah,
Even
I thought maybe he'd be in today, but
well, he
must
knew there were
be-
a bunch of others of us that were going to be. So
yeah.
Joe
Well,
Tisbert was
we-
under the impression that there was carve outs for agriculture in this bill. And I actually had to point out to him that no, there's a specific not carve out for irrigation in the bill.
No, it's carved in.
Yeah.
Carvin, yeah,
Well, thank you guys very much for your time, and hopefully we'll try to get this worked out so it's workable. And so
Thank you.
thanks again. And like I said, if you keep running into brick walls, get hold of us.
We appreciate
Well,
that.
it's certainly nice to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you all for your
thank
time.
you for all the help.
Well, committee, we've got to be on the floor in
3 minutes.
15, 17 minutes. And if we get off the floor, quick, we'll reconvene for, if we can get off at 11:30 or something, where we got a half hour, because I wanted to chat with you in regards to our housekeeping bill and dealing with that. So if we get off, say before 11:30, we'll check back in. If it's after that, and some of us got another meeting at noon. So if it's before 11:30, we'll reconvene, and if it's after, we'll see you at 1 o'clock. Well, Chris and Brian and I have got a meeting at noon. So, well, thank you, and we'll